When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, all time for general debate pursuant to House Resolution 891 had expired. Pursuant to the rule, the bill should be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule, the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Agriculture printed in the bill. The committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except those permitted in Part C of House Report 115-677. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed by the report by a member designated in the report. Shall be considered read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to amendment and shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. Shall be in order. Members, please take your conversations off the floor. The committee shall be in order. Members, please take your conversations off the floor. The committee shall be in order. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1 printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk made in order by the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 1 printed in Part C of House Report Number 115-677, offered by Mr. King of Iowa.
The committee shall be in order. Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The committee shall be in order. Members shall remove their conversations off the floor. The gentleman from Iowa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. And I bring this amendment, Amendment Number 55, to help supplement some of the good programs that are already existing within the existing Farm Bill. And what it does is it allows drainage districts to also compete for EQIP money along with the irrigation districts that exist in the country. I have worked in this arena for a lot of my adult life. And there are roughly 2,000 drainage districts in the state of Iowa. But the important part of this is this, that we're concerned about water quality and water management and nutrient management. And we have developed technology that allows for when a producer goes into a pattern tile system, a drainage system, and we used to, and we still do in most places, we just drain all that water out down to the bottom of the tile, and we do that for 12 months out of the year. And what happens is the nutrients that are applied, the nitrogen and the phosphorus in particular, go down the stream, and it impacts the water quality downstream, and it contributes to the hypoxia in the Gulf Coast as well. And so we've developed a method by which, especially the flattest ground in the Corn Belt, when this began, at least 8 million acres that were under a 2% grade could be pattern tiled and put stop logs in and store the water in the subsoil, drain it down for the 2 weeks in the spring that we're in the field, let the water table come back up again, hold it there, drain it down again for the 2 weeks in the fall that we're in the field, and let it come up the rest of the time. While that's going on, the root system of our crop, corn and soybeans in my country, different crops in others, will draw up those nutrients out of that water, and they will pull the nitrogen out, they'll pull the phosphorus out, and we can minimize the application of our fertilizer. And in doing so, and have a better utilization of our fertilizer, we can also see the water that finally does go down the stream be a far higher quality. So this allows EQIP to be spent also in drainage districts for that purpose. It's good for water quality, it's good for production efficiency, and it's something that I think has a big future for the United States of America, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim the time in opposition, even though I'm in favor of this, if that's
Objection
okay.
disordered.
Chairman, this is something that I've been working on up in my area for some time as well. We have the Red River Valley, which is a river that flows north, and it always causes us a lot of trouble with flooding and so forth, a lot of erosion problems, and we've been looking at ways to deal with this. One of the ways that we found that really works is to put in pattern tile, along with lift stations and pumps and stop logs and so forth that allow you to control this water and keep it until the water goes down. You can let it out at the appropriate time. It improves the water quality. It'll help us with flooding situations. And our water management districts up there need this authority. They'd very much use this, and it would be a good thing for not only stopping a lot of erosion, it would also improve the water quality substantially in our watershed up there. So I strongly support the amendment, and I encourage my colleagues to support it as well.
The gentleman yields back. From Iowa is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself the balance of my time, and I want to thank the gentleman from Minnesota. They understand the water quality issues and the drainage issues at least as well as we do in Iowa. And working together on this kind of a proposal, I think will yield good results. And all the way down, especially the Mississippi River, the hypoxia in the Gulf, this is good for the entire United States of America. It's something that I wish we'd have done some time ago, but I appreciate the support for this amendment. I urge its adoption, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 2 and printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Gibbs of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gibbs, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is really a sense of Congress that will help support water and wastewater utilities in innovating to meet Clean Water Act targets more effectively and potentially at a lower cost to utility by working throughout the watershed on water quality improvements. Utilities often need not to look at costly end-of-pipe treatment to remove nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. These facilities can cost hundreds of millions of dollars, and this is particularly important in Ohio, where nutrient management is an important concern. This common sense approach that many water and wastewater utilities would take is to work with farmers, landowners in the watershed to help reduce the nutrient runoff in the waterways in the first place, which in turn help reduce the cost of utility ratepayers for water treatment. This will produce a win-win for farmers, local communities, and utilities. The farmers will receive an additional revenue stream, and local communities will see lower fees for their water and wastewater services on their utility bills. For example, a utility in the city of Green Bay, Wisconsin, has put this practice to work on a pilot basis. Instead of spending $200 million on phosphorus removal treatment at the end of the pipe, they are spending an estimated $50 million investing in conservation practices for local farmers to reduce nutrient loading throughout the watershed. This amendment aligns squarely with the objectives of the Farm Bill conservation programs and will allow for greater leveraging of public-private partnerships, and will also benefit private entities that operate with MDDS permits, so TMDLs on their loads. They can encourage them to work with landowners and farmers in the watershed to reduce the TMDLs and reduce the nutrient load in the watershed completely. So we bring down the whole TMDL issue by working together and instituting more conservation practices in partnership with utilities and other private entities with the local farmers and landowners. So I encourage support of this conservation program to help provide cleaner water for all of us in the watersheds. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Mr. Chairman, I don't oppose this amendment. I don't really have any problem with it. We're using RCPP in my part of the world. I've not heard any request for this, but I don't think it does any harm, so I don't know anybody else has any comments, so I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio.
I reserved. I just want to say
Ohio is recognized.
Yeah, I want to thank the ranking member for the support, and I think it's important because there's just numerous examples of where if we work collaboratively together in a watershed, we can reduce the nutrient load and also encourage more economic activity, and it's also beneficial to the farmers and landowners. So I appreciate the support, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Now, in order to consider Amendment Number 3, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677, Amendment Number 4, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purposes did the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 4, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Rogers of Alabama.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer my amendment to allow SNAP users to purchase multivitamins. First, I'd like to thank Chairman Conaway for his hard work during this farm bill process. H.R. 2 is a bill that will strengthen the farm safety net for America's farmers and ranchers and give folks on SNAP a path out of poverty with workforce training programs. The multivitamin can serve as an effective bridge between what Americans should eat and what they actually consume. Repeated studies have shown that Americans do not consume essential nutrients at recommended levels through diet alone. Low-income and older Americans are more likely than others to have insufficient and nutritionally inadequate diets. Multivitamins are not a replacement for a healthy diet, but these supplements can help fill that nutrient gap. Safe, convenient, and scientifically supported multivitamins represent a low-cost, immediate solution for SNAP recipients looking to ensure their families receive adequate intake of essential vitamins and minerals. It is my hope that by empowering low-income Americans to achieve optimal nutrition, SNAP recipients will develop lifelong habits that will eventually break the cycle of poverty and allow them to reach their full potential. I urge passage of this common sense, no-cost amendment, and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time.
Yes.
Member arise in opposition. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alabama. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 5, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of my amendment to H.R. 2.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Bergman of Michigan.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Bergman, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Michigan.
My amendment is simple, Mr. Speaker. It directs GAO to study the credit needs of agricultural businesses that are owned and operated by Indian tribes on tribal lands. My district is home to 8 federally recognized tribes, and it has been my honor to represent each of them over the last 16 months. We often hear about how most tribes are located within food deserts, but we must remember most tribes are also located within credit deserts. Credit deserts occur when there are very few lenders available in a region. The lack of credit options severely impacts the ability of tribes and tribal members to invest and expand their agricultural businesses. By directing GAO to study the unique credit needs of tribes, we can identify solutions that will result in a system under which their needs are met in an equitable and effective manner. The farm credit system is vitally important for agricultural communities in rural America. Without sufficient access to credit, young farmers will not be able to begin a career, and experienced farmers will not be able to expand their businesses. Tribes across the country need fair and equal access to all agricultural programs so they can promote their historical and cultural knowledge for the next generation of American farmers. This farm bill represents an investment in rural America. With net farm income dropping by nearly 50% over the past 4 years, Congress must recognize the vital role our agricultural communities play and provide in the resources they need for success. I thank Chairman Conaway for his leadership in bringing forth a bill that is responsive to the needs of farm country. Mr. Speaker, I urge support for my amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Does any member rise in opposition? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Thank you.
It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 6, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 6, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Arrington of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
I want to thank Chairman Conaway for his leadership on H.R. 2. This farm bill is critical to this country's food supply to rural America. I want to thank him for a great first step, getting it out of the committee, and we've strengthened the safety net to provide stability to the ag economy here in the United States. We've made important investment in rural America and rural infrastructure, especially around the technology backbone, and we've also fully funded R&D for agriculture, which allows us to be globally competitive and gives us our producers an advantage. And then lastly, but certainly not least, I'm very proud of the reforms to the food stamp program that encourage work. We've got 6 million surplus jobs, and we don't need policies that trap people in a cycle of dependency on government and poverty. It's not the right thing to do to them. It's not right for the taxpayers. It's not good for America. Mr. Chairman, the amendment I'm offering today would provide a critical lifeline to rural hospitals by expanding the eligibility requirements in 2 of USDA's loan programs, the Business and Industry Guaranteed Loan Program and the Community Facilities Direct Loan and Guaranteed Loan Program, to allow these community hospitals to refinance their existing debt under these programs. This will lower their cost of capital and free up precious resources needed to keep these facilities operating. If we're going to maintain the ability to feed our own people and fuel the American economy, we need a strong and sustainable rural America. And the heart of rural communities is access to quality health care. What would this country be without the hardworking energy and agriculture producers in small towns across this great land? There are over 5,000 hospitals in the United States, and roughly half of them are in rural areas, serving 1 out of every 5 Americans. Without access to basic medical services, communities in America's breadbasket and energy basin would not survive. Since 2010, over 80 rural hospitals across the country have closed, including 11 in my home state of Texas. With almost half of existing hospitals operating at a loss, the number of these hospitals that are closing are guaranteed to go up. In less than 10 years, a whopping 25% of our nation's rural hospitals could close. For many of the nearly 700 rural hospitals struggling to keep their doors open, this will give them the tools and the resources necessary to maintain their viability and to continue serving their communities. If we fail to act and some of these hospitals close down, it could result in tens of thousands of lost jobs in rural communities across the country. That would cripple rural communities across this great nation and potentially devastate our agriculture and energy economy, affecting all Americans, including our friends in urban and suburban areas. I would like to conclude my remarks by thanking again the chairman, my friend and fellow West Texan, for his leadership on this farm bill. I'm proud to support it. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment so we can protect rural America by giving our community hospitals the certainty and the resources they need to keep our people and our community healthy. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized.
Chairman, I appreciate the intent of the amendment, but there's a couple problems here. One is that, I've got some hospitals in my area that have used this to establish rural hospitals. There's a limited amount of money available in this fund. And what you're going to do here with this is you're going to increase the competition for it, and there's already an increase in fees on the loans in this bill. So it's going to, for smaller communities, it's going to make it more difficult. But the bigger problem I have with this is I understand that this bill raises the limits for what is a rural area from 20,000 in the case of broadband and water, and 10,000 on waste.
Water is 10.
Yeah. Well, these are numbers that were put in the 2008 Farm Bill when I was chairman. And I just want to point out to people, the biggest city in my district is 32,000 people. I have 350 towns in my district, and only 12 of them are over 10,000. So what this does is it puts us in a situation where we're going to not be able to build hospitals because they're going to be sucked up by these bigger communities in these other parts of the country. So I just think this is something that's not needed. If you've got a town of 50,000 people, you can go get financing some other place. You don't need to be financed by USDA. So I oppose the amendment and reserve my time.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to reclaim my time.
Without objection, the gentleman's time is unanimous consent.
I respect the ranking member's comments, and I appreciate his commitment to rural America, but I would submit that my hometown, which is over the 20,000 threshold, but under the 50,000, has every bit of the challenges that small towns at 20,000 and below face. And they deserve access to quality care. And this amendment, by the way, does not change that threshold. However, that threshold is changed in the Farm Bill. It reserves the direct lending portion of the program at $2.8 billion for those communities at 20,000 and below. And it actually expands the guaranteed loan program that has been delivered capital to levels close to $150 million. And that's the part, that program would be the one we would expand for communities above 20 but below 50,000. Again, Plainview, Texas is a rural small town. It's an ag community. And if the people of Plainview and towns like that don't have access to health care, then they cannot sustain the ag economy in West Texas. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my time. I just have a problem with a town of 50,000 being called a rural town. The average town in my district is 1,000 people, 1,500 people. Those are the folks that cannot afford to do this. That's what this program is for. And, I don't know how much money we have wasted on broadband in this Congress. And one of the reasons we wasted it is we had a 50,000 population limit. And what happened is these telecom companies and cable companies went into these bigger communities because that's where they could make money, and they overbuilt the systems 2 or 3 times. And did they come out into the rural areas and do anything? No. So we still don't have broadband. And we've got, in the towns of 50,000, we got 3 systems. So what I was trying to do in 2008 was trying to focus this stuff down to where it, in my opinion, belongs. So you might, in your part of the world, that might be the thing to do, but it does not work in my district, and I don't agree with it, and I encourage my colleagues to oppose the amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 7, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 7, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Jones of North Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I thank the chairman and the ranking member for me having this opportunity to speak about this amendment. The amendment allows military towns who are on the bubble of eligibility for USDA rural development programs the ability to apply for loans and grants for their communities. With transit nature of military service, town populations change frequently, and having this buffer will otherwise allow ineligible communities the abilities to apply and compete for assistance in funding critical facilities such as fire departments, hospitals, and children's centers. Allowing these communities to compete for financial assistance does not increase spending for these programs. We're probably only talking about 4 military towns at this point. So these towns are in the rural part of America, and again, we're just saying that they should have the ability to compete. That is the amendment, the best I can explain it, and I ask for support of the amendment.
Does the gentleman reserve his time?
I reserve time, excuse me.
The gentleman reserves his time. Is there any member in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
I'm ready to call the question.
Are you ready to yield? The gentleman yields. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from North Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 8, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Latta of Ohio.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Latta, and a member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin, I want to thank the gentleman from Texas, the chairman of the committee, for his hard work on the bill, and I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the Precision Agriculture Connectivity Amendment. This bipartisan amendment, offered by myself and my friend from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack, recognizes the need for broadband in rural areas, especially on agricultural lands. I represent the largest farm income-producing district in the state of Ohio. Precision agriculture technologies and practices, like the use of Internet of Things equipment, provide a great opportunity to improve U.S. farm productivity and sustainability. However, the lack of high-speed broadband in rural areas, especially in farmlands and ranchlands, hinders the use of advanced technologies in agriculture operations. My amendment seeks to improve broadband access to farmers and ranchers by establishing a task force for reviewing the connectivity and technology needs of precision agriculture. The task force will be created primarily by the Federal Communications Commission due to their expertise in broadband. However, we also recognize the value of the United States Department of Agriculture in this discussion. Therefore, the FCC would be required to work in collaboration with the USDA on gathering broadband data and for selecting members of the task force. This task force will be required to identify current gaps in broadband coverage on agricultural lands and recommend policies that will promote the rapid expanded deployment of broadband internet access service in unserved areas. Simply put, this amendment would help to address a significant need in agricultural lands. Without broadband, farmers cannot utilize precision agriculture that allows for the collection of field data in real time that can help with crop management. This type of technology helps farmers maximize resources to reduce costs and increase crop yields by up to 70% by 2050, helping to maintain America's long-term leadership in global food production. Furthermore, advanced machinery helps promote environmentally sustainable practices. I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan amendment to help deploy much-needed broadband in unserved rural agricultural areas. And, Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Chairman, I'm not going to oppose this amendment. I just want to point out that what you did in Amendment 6 is going to undermine what you're trying to do in Amendment 8, because it's going to allow the telecom companies to game the system. And I don't know how many billions of dollars we've wasted on those companies, and they've not accomplished hardly a thing. In fact, they're the ones that have stopped us from getting broadband in the rural parts of my district because they vetoed some stuff that the state is doing that actually would work. And what we need to do to fix this is we need to change the Universal Service Fund, which is still tied to telephones. And that's what got us telephones in all of rural America, because we had a Universal Service Fund that was put on everybody's phone bill, and that gave us the money to go out and put the phones in every house. They're still doing that today, so I have broadband at my deer camp, and the way I got it was because I had to put a telephone in order for them to get the subsidy so they could run the line to my camp. And so if you want to get this done, what really needs to be done is we need to change the Universal Service Fund and put it on broadband. So we've got the money to go out in those underserved areas that are never going, there's one person a mile, one house a mile. Nobody can make money on it. So the only way that's going to work is if you got money coming from us to get those companies to go out and do it. So, I agree with what you're trying to do here, and I'm for what you're trying to do, but I think it's not going to happen because we've tried and we've spent billions of dollars and nothing has happened so far, and I have no confidence in these big telecom companies that are getting anything done. So with that, I got it off my chest. I'm not going to oppose your amendment. God bless you and good luck.
And yields. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I appreciate the gentleman's comments. And again, it's important because, again, in our area of where I represent in the state of Ohio, we have a lot of unserved areas. And we talk about unserved and underserved areas, and we want to make sure that, especially out in the agriculture areas, that we get that area served because they are unserved at this time. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back the balance of my time and ask for support of the amendment.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Ohio. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 9, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 9, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Thompson of Pennsylvania.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. Chairman Conway, Ranking Member Peterson, thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to speak on this amendment. Chronic wasting disease is a wildlife health disorder impacting the cervid populations in 24 states, including Pennsylvania. The disease attacks the brain and nervous system of these animals, which include deer, elk, mule, and moose species, and always results in death. Currently, we don't have a way to live test, and there is no cure or vaccine for the disease. First identified in Colorado in the 1960s, CWD as it's known, wasn't detected in Pennsylvania until 2012. However, the problem continues to grow as the State Game Commission has found a doubling of instances between 2016 and 2017. If this trend continues, we will see a devastating impact on our cervid populations, as well as related ecological consequences. Title VII, the research portion of the Farm Bill, provides important support for innovation and a research and development at our nation's land-grant universities and agricultural colleges. To help wildlife managers and states combat the problem of CWD, my amendment simply adds chronic wasting disease to Section 7208, High Priority Extension Initiatives. According to the CBO, this amendment would have no change in direct spending or revenues. However, this amendment would help focus some resources towards chronic wasting disease research. A number of organizations have endorsed this amendment, including the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, Wildlife Management Institute, Quality Deer Management Association, National Deer Alliance, National Wildlife Federation, and the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And I appreciate the opportunity today to offer this amendment and request the support of my colleagues, and I reserve.
The gentleman reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Mr. Chairman, I agree that chronic wasting is a serious problem. We have it in Minnesota. We've spent a lot of money already in Minnesota on research, as they have in Wisconsin. I don't know, probably other places. But does this do anything about the problem of this getting out of farm deer farms and so forth? Because they just found in southern Minnesota that this was spread by deer getting out of a farm deer situation. And they went in there, and every deer was in that farm had chronic wasting disease. Does it do anything in terms of doing research to go in and make sure those herds are not contributing to the problem?
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Well, I thank the ranking member for that question. It's an important part of this discussion. Actually, first of all, it's important that people understand that, let me just say up front, chronic wasting disease is not transmitted to humans. There's no case of that. And I know that wasn't your question, but I think that's important to...
It's not what?
It's not transmitted to humans.
Well, right.
Yeah, but I think it's important for those who might be listening to understand that. I don't want to create a fear factor here. And the research at the USDA so far shows there's never been a documented case of a farm deer transferring CWD to wild population.
That's not true.
All the farm deer that, just let me share with you, all farm deer must be CWD certified, meaning testing for over 5 years to be eligible for interstate shipment and commerce. And there is a USDA federal rule. All farm deer in the federal herd certification program must test 100% of their death loss for CWD, and state and federal fish and wildlife agencies test a low percentage of wild deer for CWD. So the focus on this is the wild deer. It is if a farm deer is determined to be CWD positive, in almost all cases the entire herd is put down, as you had mentioned
right.
in your experience, leaving the farmer without a source of income or business. The goal of the amendment, however, is, I think would help in that situation, because the goal of the amendment is to find a live test or a cure for CWD, since scientists believe it is naturally occurring in the wild. And if we had a vaccine that we could, then we can increase the number of sportsmen and women in the field to help with the Pittman-Robertson funds that go to conservation. The total economic impact of farm-served industry is $7.9 billion a year in the U.S. and employs almost 57,000 people who contribute greatly to the rural economy, state, and certainly federal economies as well. And so it would benefit the outcome of this would benefit both farm but also wild CWD instances and cases and prevention.
Gentlemen, I guess it's my time.
Is recognized. Do you reserve for your time?
I reserve.
All right. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Well, I just, did you say that USDA says there's never been a case where it's been transmitted from a farm to wild?
Yes.
Well, that's not true because it's happened in Minnesota in 2 or 3 cases.
Yeah.
So maybe they need to be researched. They're a little behind the times, it seems to me. In southeast Minnesota, we don't have it up where I'm at, but in the southeast, this is prevalent. Same thing in Wisconsin. And so everybody that takes a deer has to take it into the DNR and get it tested currently. Once this thing gets into the wild, it is very hard to eradicate, without wiping out the whole herd, which, some places are going to do that. So I'm supportive of what you're trying to do. I just want to make sure that we're doing within USDA and the animal welfare health thing that they've got some resources there that can go in and make sure that these farms are not transferring this stuff out into the wild when a deer gets loose. And that's what happened apparently in southeast Minnesota. And that's my only concern. Maybe we could work together on the language and improve it. So, I'll support your amendment. Go back.
The gentleman yields. Pennsylvania.
I yield back my brain.
All right. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from Texas, seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I move the House now do rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chair. The House will be in order. Mr. Chair.
Just read that.
The Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2 and has come to no resolution thereon.
The House will come to order. Pursuant to House Resolution 891 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2. Will the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, kindly take the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for the reform and continuation of agricultural and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes.
Should I get order or not? When the Committee of the Whole rose on Wednesday, May 16, 2018, Amendment Number 9, printed in Part C of the House Report 115-677, offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, had been disposed of. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 10, printed in Part C of the House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Washington seek recognition? The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 10, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Ms. Herrera Butler of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Herrera Butler, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Chairman Conway, for the opportunity to speak on this important amendment that I'm offering to the Farm Bill today. I also want to thank my colleague, Congressman Westerman, for his tireless work on behalf of our rural communities that are dependent on timber. Mr. Speaker, the key takeaway here is simple. If monies are generated during restorative work in our forests, then a portion of those monies generated from that work ought to remain in the community. Traditional timber sales require that a quarter of the revenue stay in the local community, the county. But when the U.S. Forest Service or the BLM use what's called stewardship contracts to work in the forest, none of those proceeds remain locally. Now, our forested counties are facing a financial crisis right now. Federal endangered species listings have left timber-dependent communities in Southwest Washington with little or no revenue from timber sales. In counties that are primarily federally owned, like Skamania County in my district, which is 97% owned by the government, they're unable to make up these drastically reduced revenues from property taxes. This means that by no fault of their own, they lack the local tax base to support even the most basic of local services, like schools or roads or local fire or police. To help make up some of that revenue, Congress created the Secure Rural Schools program in 2000. And unfortunately, despite my and my colleagues' persistent efforts to find a long-term solution through SRS, we cannot keep relying on the federal government's short-term fixes. That's not doing right by these communities. This common sense amendment will empower desperately needed funds to stay in the local communities. Individuals and families should not be victim of federal dysfunction. Let's not allow the federal contracting program for timber harvest and forest restoration to leave those neighboring communities empty-handed. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment and ensure that a portion of the proceeds from these contracts are being rightfully directed to timber counties. I yield back the balance of my time, and I urge support of this important amendment. Actually, Mr. Speaker, I don't yield back my time. I'd like to maintain my time.
Does the gentlelady reserve?
Yes.
The gentlelady reserves. The gentleman reserves. Does anyone wish to claim time in opposition? Gentlelady from Washington.
Well, with that, I yield back the balance of my time. Okay, Mr. Speaker, I don't yield my time back. Can I maintain my time and yield to the gentleman, Mr. Westerman?
The gentlelady yields. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized. How much time does the gentlelady wish to yield?
Such time as the gentleman may use.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I would also like to commend the gentlelady from Washington State, Ms. Herrera Butler, for her leadership on this issue. Mr. Speaker, amendment that's at the desk directs a portion of revenue from the stewardship contracting toward individual counties for further investments in roads, schools, and the like. The amendment has no effect on in-kind contributions or exchanges of timber for goods or services provided. This amendment only affects the rare instance where stewardship contracts are exchanged for cash. Per the 1908 Forest Service Revenue Sharing Law, counties are entitled to 25% of all timber receipts sold from federal lands within their borders. This amendment simply ensures that if it looks like a timber sale where timber is exchanged for cash, counties receive the same share they would if the Forest Service had sold the timber outright. The argument that this amendment siphons off money from the Forest Service is false. The amendment does not affect or reduce the reinvestment from in-kind contributions. Furthermore, little investment can be made in our nation's forest at all if there are no local communities to cultivate the investment. This amendment ensures that counties can continue to invest in their forest and their children's future, both by protecting the good work of stewardship contracting and by ensuring that our rural counties get their fair share. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support a fair share for rural communities and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentlelady
And I do finally officially yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady yields back. Is there anyone wishing to claim time in opposition? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from Washington. Those in favor say aye. Those in opposition say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 11, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 11, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Gosar of Arizona.
Without objection, pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to offer a common sense amendment that will empower local communities by allowing counties to be included in Good Neighbor Authority cooperative agreements and contracts in order to improve forest health and bolster watershed restoration. The base Farm Bill reauthorizes Good Neighbor Authority through fiscal year 2023 and contains a provision that allows tribal governments to be eligible to enter in Good Neighbor Authority cooperative agreements and contracts. Our amendment simply builds on that common sense provision by also authorizing counties to be eligible for Good Neighbor Authority. Good Neighbor Authority projects have been remarkably successful. From 2002 to 2013, 63 projects treated more than 4,100 acres in Colorado and Utah. These worthwhile treatments mitigated the threat of catastrophic wildfire, reducing flooding, enhanced forest health, and improved water quality. Counties on both sides of the aisle requested this amendment and new authority. The problem in Coconino County, a liberal county represented by my colleague Mr. O'Halloran, is that the wood is low-value timber, so they can't attract private industry to thin their forest for pending work they need completed. Counties want to do this type of work themselves or find a contractor if the federal government won't treat their forests. All that's missing is the authorization from Congress. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources is already entering into cooperative agreements with a partner in the management of Wisconsin County Forest, and it's working for them as well. Some counties have actual foresters or other land management professionals on staff. These are not limited specifically to large counties either. For example, Adams County, Idaho, population 4,000, has a natural resource committee that is chaired by a retired Forest Service employee who also serves on the local forest collaborative. Coconino County has a forest restoration director who would be in charge of these county Good Neighbor Authority agreements. This is a director-level executive position that reports directly to the deputy county manager. While some counties will likely contract with outside entities to perform the work, county contracts will be overseen by someone such as an auditor or a clerk. The National Association of Counties supports this amendment, stating, and I quote, "NACO stands ready to work with you to promote locally supported consensus-driven solutions to address forest management challenges and to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. NACO encourages the United States House of Representatives to adopt our amendment to H.R. 2 and give counties the opportunity to assist our federal partners to make our national forests healthy again." End of quote. In addition to NACO, I'm honored to have the support of the National Water Resources Association, the Arizona Association of Conservation Districts, the Salt River Project, the Colorado Pork Producers Council, and more than 20 other local and national organizations and elected officials. I urge all my colleagues in the House to support this common sense amendment that will empower bipartisan communities throughout the country, improve forest health, and bolster watershed restoration. Again, this is an authorization, not a requirement, and it puts more power in the hands of local communities who need the work done but have nowhere to turn under the status quo. I would now like to yield 30 seconds to my good friend and colleague from Montana, who is a co-sponsor of this amendment, Mr. Giaforte.
The gentleman is recognized.
I thank the gentleman. I rise in support of this amendment I co-sponsored with Representative Gosar that will expand the Good Neighbor Authority for counties. Good Neighbor Authority allows the Forest Service to enter into cooperative agreements and contracts with states and Puerto Rico to execute projects that perform watershed restoration, forest management services on national forest systems lands. The current text of the Farm Bill includes language to expand the Good Neighbor Authority to include Indian tribes. This simple amendment seeks to build on that common sense provision by empowering local communities and allowing the Forest Service to include counties as partners to these agreements. I yield back the balance of my time.
So yield to the chairman for his comments.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Mr. Gosar for offering this common sense amendment. Good Neighbor Authority was one of the hard-fought achievements in the 2014 Farm Bill that's proven useful in improving our national forests and our rural communities. And I was pleased to expand the Good Neighbor Authority to Indian tribes in the base Texas bill, and I'm happy that my colleague continues to improve on the forestry title with this amendment authorizing counties to be eligible. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves. Does anyone wish to claim time in opposition to the amendment?
I yield back.
The gentleman from Arizona yields back. The question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 12, printed in Part C of the House Report in 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Montana seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 12, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Gianforte of Montana.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Montana, Mr. Gianforte, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Montana.
Mr. Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
My amendment would allow land management agencies like the U.S. Forest Service and BLM to quickly remove dead trees after wildfires to pay for reforestation and rehabilitation after devastating fires. Last year, over 1 million acres burned in Montana. Livelihoods were threatened, wildlife habitats were destroyed, and whole landscapes were scarred. My common sense amendment was passed verbatim in the Resilient Federal Forest Act by this body. It would allow the agencies to quickly respond, as well as to raise funds to further rehabilitate the forest. An expedited environmental assessment would still be required, and public input would still be included in order to move forward with the project. Most importantly, this amendment would require that at least 75% of the burned area would be reforested. These landscape scale projects are badly needed. The Rice Ridge Fire burned over 160,000 acres alone. Quickly responding to the damage caused will protect our public lands and restore our watersheds for the future and restore them to the quality we have come to love in Montana. As I mentioned, similar language was included in the Resilient Federal Forest Act, which passed the House on a bipartisan basis on November 11, 2017. My amendment is supported by the Federal Forest Resource Coalition, the National Association of Counties, the National Water Resources Association, and the Idaho Forest Group. I'd like to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Is there anyone who wishes to claim time in opposition to the amendment? Gentleman from Montana.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, I yield the gentleman from Arizona as much time as he may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of my good friend and colleague, Congressman Gianforte's Wildfire Salvage Operations Amendment. I'm glad that with the Farm Bill packages, we have the opportunity to look at forestry and wildfire issues from all sides. This amendment is part and parcel of a broader wildfire strategy that requires proactive action from Congress for the steps before, during, and after wildfires are expected. Specifically, this amendment will ensure that the National Forest System forest is cleared and replanted if a catastrophic wildfire charges it to the ground. Our National Forest System lands will be rehabilitated after wildfire devastates them, but in a way consistent with forest plans. That way, the ecosystem of the new forest will have better management and be less susceptible to another large-scale burnt-down event. This is a forward-thinking amendment to fix a backwards system we've devised in Congress, and I urge you to vote for this demonstration that shows Congress isn't willing to just give up and let our forest system lands be catastrophically burnt. I applaud Representative Gianforte for his strong leadership and tireless efforts to reduce the threat of dangerous wildfires. I urge the adoption of this common sense amendment, and with that I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. Is there anyone else who wishes to claim opposition, time in opposition to the amendment? Gentleman from Montana.
I'd like to yield some time to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
Does the gentleman want to yield?
As much time as he may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Well, I thank the gentleman. Actually, really thank you to Mr. Gianforte for offering this amendment. Important amendment for Montana and, quite frankly, for our national forest system as a whole. Over the past several years, fires have had a devastating impact on our forest system lands, resulting in deteriorated landscapes. I've witnessed this firsthand across the country as a former chairman of the subcommittee in agriculture on forestry. It is vital that the Forest Service has the right tools, the ability to restore these landscapes as quickly as possible, to preserve habitat, clean air, and significant impact that these incidents can have on clean water. Unfortunately, litigation stalls many of these projects. As Madison County, Montana Commissioner Dave Schultz noted before the House Natural Resource Federal Land Subcommittee in May of 2015, due to the threat of litigation from outside groups refusing to meet or collaborate with the community, what started out as a consensus proposal for 100,000 acres of fire salvage and reforestation reduced to less than 2,000 acres of salvage. Fear of litigation prevents the Forest Service from thinking big, and another quote he offered, significant factor in preventing responsible management of our nation's forests. I certainly support this amendment that has already passed the House, and I urge my colleagues to do the same, and I yield back.
Does the gentleman from Montana wish to reserve?
At this time, I urge adoption of my common sense amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Montana. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 13, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 13, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Westerman of Arkansas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, my amendment promotes collaborative forest management, cuts red tape, and encourages the Forest Service to plan for the long-term health of our nation's forest. Mr. Speaker, if we were to go to the doctor and we had cancer and the doctor offered a treatment for that cancer but decided it might not be in our best interest, we wouldn't just leave. We would want to find out what the best treatment was. But what's happening on our national forest is if one plan is rejected, we do nothing, and we don't treat the disease of mismanagement that's currently happening on our forest. Implementing sound, scientifically based management reforms is necessary to address the growing economic and environmental threats of catastrophic wildfire. Prevention through active management is the best medicine to make our forest healthy. By requiring environmental analysis of a collaboratively developed proposal to be weighed against a no-action alternative, the impacts of doing nothing on forest health and wildfire risk, this amendment ensures that taxpayer dollars are spent only on analysis and project planning that protects our forest long-term health. Further, my amendment ensures that long-term forest health is considered by the courts when granting an injunction on critical forest management activities. This amendment previously received bipartisan support in the House as part of the Resilient Federal Forest Act. It has no cost to the American taxpayer and is supported by a variety of organizations, including the American Farm Bureau Federation, the National Association of Counties, the National Association of Home Builders, and more. Mr. Speaker, inaction itself is a forest management decision. Standing by and doing nothing is the reason we continue to watch our forests burn. I reserve my time.
The gentleman reserves. Is there anyone wishing to claim time in opposition to the amendment?
Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arkansas and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you very much. This amendment significantly alters critical environmental review requirements and limits opportunity for the public to challenge forest management projects. Restricting NEPA analysis to two alternatives may seem like it will save time and money, but this cuts right at the heart of critical environmental protections. NEPA doesn't hurt forest management projects. Bad planning, ignoring science, disingenuous intentions hurt forest management projects. NEPA supports collaboration through public participation. It allows many voices and different voices to participate in the planning process, which leads to better results and reduced cost. NEPA ensures federal agencies consider all alternatives without requiring that agencies select the most environmentally friendly option or value the environment over other concerns. Much like the forestry provisions in the base text of this bill, we have been down this road before. House Republicans tried to include harmful provisions to scale bedrock environmental laws and restrict access to the courts during the omnibus negotiations. All of these toxic proposals were rejected by the Senate, and let's not make the Senate say no for a second time. I urge a no vote on this amendment and reserve the balance of my time and yield back.
Does the gentleman reserve or yield back?
Reserve. Thank you, Mr.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, again, does not sidestep any environmental activity. It just simply says that we have to evaluate the do-nothing option and what the effect of the forest is on that. At this time, I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the amendment offered by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Westerman. The United States is about to embark on yet another year of ravaging, catastrophic wildfire. I say embark because this is ultimately a choice. While some amount of summer wildfire is to be expected during the heat of summer, the devastation we've seen in recent years is unprecedented. 2017 was one of the worst wildfire seasons on record. More than 58,000 fires burned more than 9.2 million acres. The Forest Service spent more than $2.5 billion on suppression costs this fiscal year alone, a new record. These expenditures and destruction coincide perfectly with Congress's dereliction of its duty to ensure our land management agencies are equipped with the tools and authorities to properly manage our forests. Congress has provided some legislative fixes this year, but I think every member understands full well we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back just yet. As the coming months will demonstrate, we, and by extension the American taxpayer, are still on the hook here. We're susceptible to years more of supermassive fire blanketing the country unless we build on our progress. Mr. Westerman's amendment here does just that. It will require the government to holistically evaluate the impacts of its forestry decisions on overall forest health. By requiring the costs of inaction to be weighed, the Forest Service will have to demonstrate its decisions are ultimately in a forest interest. I applaud Mr. Westerman, Representative Westerman, for his strong leadership and tireless efforts to improve a failing system that we have inherited. I urge the adoption of the Common Sense Amendment, and with that I yield back.
The gentleman from Arkansas reserves. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you again, Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. If my colleagues across the aisle are serious about the long-term health of our forests, they should stop and pause and listen to scientists, which tell us climate change threatens, in a very factual and scientific way and direct way, the health of our forests, wildlife, and the ever-increasing forest fires that we must confront every year. We can use NEPA as a tool to consider these impacts, and if we are smart, we will strengthen the law instead of weakening it piece by piece. The issue of forest health is a serious issue. This amendment does not deal with the complexity and the seriousness of this issue. If indeed we're to deal with this issue, then it has to be comprehensive, and it has to be looked at not by eliminating protections and public access, but by truly doing something for the long-term health of these forests, and that is to consider all available information and not deny scientific information in the process of blaming NEPA or any other law that exists for public and for the protection of our forests as the reason why we're having forest fires. Forest fires are a direct result of climate change, and as such, not to consider that as part and parcel of a solution is a grave mistake that will not solve the problem. I urge a no vote on this amendment It should not be tucked into this Farm Bill. It merits its own proper discussion and debate in this House, and that's the direction we should go. I urge a no vote, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, again, this amendment does not sidestep NEPA. It does not weaken NEPA. It just simply says you have to evaluate the alternative of doing nothing. And I would like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton.
The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Westerman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that we've actually found some common ground. When our colleague is saying, let's use science, effectively that's what we're talking about with this amendment, to be able to have analysis, to be able to have project planning. Let me give you a real-life example in southwestern Colorado. The West Fork Complex fire, which erupted because we had trees growing not at the elevation that they should, overgrowth in our forests that resulted in a massive fire. I would suggest that if you care about endangered species, if you care about protecting our waterways, if you care about having an abundant resource to be able to develop, to be able to support our schools through the rural school programs as well, this is an opportunity to be able to create those healthy forests and to be able to move forward with good common sense planning that's going to be provided by this amendment. I encourage the passage of the amendment and applaud Mr. Westerman's efforts on this. I yield back.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
And Mr. Speaker, again, I just want to say this amendment ensures that we prioritize the long-term health of our forest and we equip the Forest Service with the tools they need to execute a plan. I urge my colleagues to support the sustained health of our nation's forest, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arkansas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, on that I would like a recorded vote. Request a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arkansas will be postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 14, printed in Part C of the House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alaska seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 14, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Young of Alaska.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Alaska, Mr. Young, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alaska.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record my statement.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I want to, never mind, revive and extend.
Without objection.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, this is a simple amendment. It's a Clinton-era roadless rule that applies to one-size-fits-all to the approach of areas where there are policies that rarely work, especially the federally locked lands in Alaska. At 16.8 million acres, the Tongass National Forest is the largest of the national forest system. Coupled with the Chugach National Forest, Alaska contains 12% of the total acres of national forest lands in the total United States. The roadless rule is nothing more than another effort to end the multiple-use mandate of federal forest lands, something that is required by law but often ignored by nameless, faceless, unelected bureaucrats. Although the Tongass is over 100 years old, only 400,000 acres have been harvested. Of the remaining acreage, much of the forest is not topographically suitable for timber harvest, and 6.6 million acres are congressionally designated as wilderness areas, national monuments, and roadless areas. Not only does the roadless rule violate the authorities granted under the Alaska National Lands Act, it was adopted without proper consultation or consideration of the countless communities that rely on responsible resource development. Nearly 96% of the Tongass National Forest and 99% of the Chugach are protected by ANILCA and the forest management plans. Exempting Alaska from the roadless rule will help make certain that what is left of the timber industry in Southeast can survive. Many individuals adamantly oppose logging old growth in roadless areas. However, old growth will continue to be predominant in the Tongass, and given the remote nature of Alaska, the vast majority of the forest is in a roadless state. Of 90% of the Tongass is inaccessible by road. The access to timber not only costs good paying jobs, but results in trees dying of disease and infestations. Dead trees serve no purpose other than to become kindling, creating fires. So by having a robust timber industry, we can help prevent the spread of serious wildfires like have been seen in the lower 48. To be clear, we're not talking about clear-cutting the entire national forest. We just want to help to stay healthy and fulfill the multiple use of the Tongass by significantly limiting the areas that are eligible for harvesting, the implementation of the roadless rule actually makes conservation more difficult since locations with less conservation value often can't be selected. If any reasonable form of timber industry is to exist in the near future, it's imperative we restore Alaska's exemption from the roadless rule as quickly as possible. It has placed an undue burden on my state and the people of my state. And may I say, Mr. Chairman, we worry about immigration, we worry about homeless, we worry about employment, we worry about education. I'm saying this roadless rule takes away the opportunity for people to survive for their family, and they can have a sustainable silvicultural industry taking care of our forests in southeast Alaska. The roadless rule should never apply to Alaska to begin with. With that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Is there anyone who wishes to claim time in opposition to the amendment?
Speaker.
The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you. Rise in opposition to the amendment offered by the gentleman for Alaska and yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment exempts all national forests in Alaska from the Forest Service's roadless rule, one of the country's most important conservation safeguards. Inventory roadless areas account for only 2% of our nation's landmass, but they provide invaluable benefits: clean drinking water for over 60 million Americans, wildlife habitat for numerous threatened and endangered species, and they act as a critical carbon sinks that mitigate the impacts of climate change. All of these benefits are threatened by this amendment. Nationwide, the roadless rule is incredibly popular. Our constituents understand the importance of keeping intact roadless areas and managing our last truly wild places in a manner that protects old-growth forests and other precious resources from the pressures of development and extraction. It is not just people in the lower 48. Alaskans understand the importance of protecting the roadless landscape. That's why hundreds of businesses in southeast Alaska have joined together to oppose overturning the recently adopted Tongass Forest Plan and efforts like this amendment to overturn protection for roadless areas. These businesses rely on clean water and healthy forests that support a thriving salmon populations and a robust tourist economy. By rolling back safeguards that protect old-growth forests from harmful development, this amendment threatens fundamental linchpins of the regional economy. The roadless rule is not a job killer, as some make it out to be, because the Tongass Forest Plan balances protections of the old-growth forests by allowing public roads, hydropower projects, utility connectors, and access to inholding, including mines, so its application in Alaska does not adversely affect community access or economic development projects in the legitimate public interest. An exception for Alaska is a major policy change that hasn't had a hearing or any other form of consideration in the House. The controversial provision should be stuck in this Farm Bill without any accountability to the American public. I urge a no vote on this amendment and reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from Arizona reserves. Gentleman from Alaska.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, I yield what time he may consume to the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Conway.
The gentleman from the great state of Texas is recognized.
Well, thank you. Just simply support the gentleman's amendment. It's common sense. Allows Alaskans to do a better job of taking care of Alaska, and I trust them to make that happen. I support the gentleman's amendment and urge adoption.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Chairman, the comments from the other side of the aisle were talking about Alaskans opposing this amendment. All due respects, I'm an elected representative. And if they don't like what I do, they don't vote for me. I just believe in jobs. When I first got elected to this job, when I first started this Tongass battle, we had 15,000 jobs in Alaska, the timber industry in the Tongass. And through the National Land Act itself, we were told that no other jobs would be lost in the timber industry. And they slowly crept around and eliminated what remaining jobs occurred. And the sad part about it, in my point of view, they've killed the timber industry. That was not the intent. We were supposed to have a timber industry. Then along comes the Clinton-era roadless rule. That means you can't build a road anywhere it hasn't had a road. How do you have a hydropower site? We had to fight for 4 years to get a hydropower site. This bill, this action here by a administration, this and the past administrations have to understand this is about employment. This is about managing timber. And those who don't manage anything, you destroy it. So I'm urging my body this Congress to do what's right for the state of Alaska and right for the timber, right for the people that live there and depend upon a source of income other than a living off, very frankly, somebody giving them something. They want to work for it. So I urge that time, and I reserve the balance of my time.
All the time for debate has expired. The question. Oh, I'm sorry. The gentleman from Alaska's time has expired. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Alaska recently lost in federal court on this very issue. The Supreme Court refused to hear the state's appeal of a ruling that struck down the Songus exemption. This ended the case. This amendment attempts to run around that ruling and would exempt Alaska from protections that are widely supported and intended to protect our pristine public lands. I recommend a no vote on this. And with regard to the roadless rule, if the issues as the very important and significant issues we confront, whether it's immigration, whether it's employment, whether it's education, whether the issues of poverty and hunger in this country, I would suggest that the cause for not finding solutions rests in this chamber. It doesn't rest with the roadless rule. And with that, I recommend a no vote again, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back to questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Alaska. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed.
Mr. Speaker, on that, I would ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arizona will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 15, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. To what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 15, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Pierce of New Mexico.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself such time as I may consume. This amendment deals with a small community that is in and around, that is kind of circled around by the Gila National Forest. This amendment basically is going to allow the Forest Service to sell parcels of Forest Service land to the village of Santa Clara. It's a small village, about 2,000 people live in it. Yet, like many of our mountain communities, like many of our communities in the Forest Service, are slowly starving to death. The land that the Forest Service would sell to them is adjacent to the village. It is not a part of the larger national forest. It's just an isolated parcel. The Forest Service does not want to manage this land. It is in the state that it's in because it was set apart back in 1869 as a part of the Fort Bayard Military Reservation. Because the lands were reserved as a military post, they cannot be disposed of in the normal fashion by the Forest Service. They must be released by law. Now, back in 1968, there was a bill that released other parcels of Fort Bayard to be sold and to be distributed to the state. This parcel just was not included in that for some reason, and so the amendment steps around and includes that now to where the Forest Service would be allowed to dispose of the land. It would have to be appraised. It would be sold through normal processes. It's just that it requires a law to do it. It cannot go any other way. The village is desperately in need of expansion room. Like I said, this Forest Service land butts up against the village and stops their growth, stops their economic potential, and it's a very key piece of property for the village, but it is not a key piece of property for the Forest Service. I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this non-controversial amendment and would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Is there any member who wishes to claim time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Just, I would wrap up by saying again, this is a non-controversial amendment. Would urge adoption and would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back to questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Mexico. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 16, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 16, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. LaMalfa of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa, and the member opposed to each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The largest broadband deployment gap exists in rural communities where more than 12 million Americans lack coverage. Wireless communications companies require access to land or infrastructure to site the antennas necessary to provide service. Often, to reach more rural areas throughout our country, they require access to federal land to ensure more complete coverage, including for providing emergency services. This need is expected to increase as providers deploy facilities to support 5G wireless services, which will require more antennas spaced closer together. Unfortunately, the process for securing access to federal land and property has been problematic, with red tape, bureaucracy being the main issue. Providers have experienced lost or missing applications, paperwork left to languish for years, varying or undisclosed rules within agencies, redundant historical or environmental reviews, and inconsistent denials of the process. In some cases, providers do not even receive a response from federal agencies, resulting in stalled build-out and discouragement in rural areas. This is completely unacceptable. My amendment today seeks to streamline and expedite the regulatory framework necessary to utilize federal lands for broadband infrastructure deployments. Specifically, the language would require the Secretary of Agriculture, within 1 year of enactment, to issue regulations that would streamline the siting process for Forest Service land and ensure that the process is uniform across all the organizational units of the Forest Service while eliminating overlapping requirements. Applications would be trackable and deemed granted, if not acted upon, within 270 days, 9 months. Lastly, any fees collected for allowing siting on Forest Service land can be used for processing the applications and the development, management, and improvement of sites for communications facilities. So I ask my colleagues to support this common sense amendment that simply aims to improve access to rural broadband coverage for rural Americans who deserve it across this nation. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Does any member wish to claim time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield 30 seconds to my colleague and good friend from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
The gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of my good friend and colleague, Congressman LaMalfa's amendment. The amendment aims to streamline a bureaucratic process that is hampering broadband infrastructure development in rural America. As chairman of the Western Caucus and representative for Arizona's 4th Congressional District, I can tell you that this problem is all too real in the communities that I represent. Many families and businesses in the West still lack basic broadband. According to a November 2017 Brookings Institute study, more than 50% of my district lives in neighborhoods without an available broadband connection. Many of you all will find this hard to believe, but a huge chunk of my district has no social media platform whatsoever. Closing the broadband availability gap should be a priority for all members of Congress. Doing so will create jobs, improve education, and grow our economy. I applaud Representative LaMalfa for his leadership and tireless efforts to close the broadband availability gap. I urge adoption of this excellent amendment, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, my colleague from Arizona. I appreciate the support and your excellent words towards that. In closing on that, Mr. Speaker, again, the concerns about this might be on environmental. This amendment does now not allow anyone to circumvent environmental protections already in place. It simply requires an agency to fix the current regulatory maze filled with excessive red tape to deploy broadband infrastructure. That's it. To be clear, if we want to deploy broadband networks across the country that support 5G, we should really be doing something about it now. Americans rely on broadband for the jobs, telemedicine, distance learning, emergency services, and many more good reasons. Again, with almost half of rural Americans not having access to good broadband internet today, They will continue to lag behind and suffer if we do not address these regulatory barriers. Mr. Speaker, 270 days, 9 months, really that should be a long enough gestation period to process applications by these federal agencies. So with that, I ask the aye vote. I appreciate support on both sides of the aisle. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back to question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor say aye. Those in opposition say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 17, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 17, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Westerman of Arkansas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arkansas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
My amendment is simple. It calls for the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management to report back on the progress they are making to address the problem of catastrophic wildfire, the problem that has continued to get worse year after year under the current program. Our current forest management crisis took decades of mismanagement, inaction, and neglect to create. We have essentially, slowly and methodically loved our trees to death on much of our federal lands. It will take decades to reverse the effects this mismanagement has had on our forest, during which time we will likely see more major devastating wildfires. This amendment simply requires our federal agencies addressing this issue to report back on how they are doing, not only so Congress can provide oversight on their progress, but so the American people can know how their federal government is doing, so we can measure, monitor, and demand accountability. Mr. Speaker, I think I speak for this entire chamber when I say that our goal is to reduce the effects of wildfires and be transparent for the American people each step of the way. My amendment promotes transparency and accountability as we work towards this goal. I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Does anyone wish to claim time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Arkansas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 18, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 18, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Pierce of New Mexico.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Pierce, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico.
Mr. Chairman, I recognize myself for as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
This amendment would reauthorize the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, CFLRP, for another 5-year period. This program was initiated in 2009, and basically it aims to restore vital sections of our national forest lands. There are 2 projects in New Mexico, the Zuni Mountain and the Southwest Jemez, with over 420,000 acres total that would be covered under this collaborative project. The Zuni Mountain project supports one of the last mills in New Mexico. We used to have 123 mills that processed timber. Now we're down to just 1 or 2. That destruction in the capacity and the infrastructure for our national forest has been devastating in our ability to really accomplish projects of selective thinning and balanced management of our forests. The extension of the program is going to provide enough certainty to this last mill operator to make investments that will reduce the cost of conducting forest management activities in western New Mexico. If we lose the mill, if it does in fact close, which should not be an option, it's going to increase the cost of the projects due to transportation costs. And so it makes sense for the government, it makes sense for the U.S. Forest Service and the taxpayer and the local economy to keep this mill open and to find others that would reopen with these collaborative projects that come under this program. This program is a good starting point, and when paired with other reforms that open up more acreage for treatment, it's going to increase the profitability of restoration projects, and that will in turn save taxpayers money. I would reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman reserves. Is there any member who wishes to claim time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Again, I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting this non-controversial amendment and would yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Mexico. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider the amendment number 19, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 19, printed in Part C of House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Tipton of Colorado.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. West Fork is in a remote part of Dolores County, Colorado, surrounded by the San Juan National Forest. Emergency and fire response is a challenge in this part of the county because the closest fire station is currently 26 miles away. The amendment I have offered would authorize the Forest Service to convey approximately 3.6 acres of National Forest System land to Dolores County for the strict purpose of building and operating a fire station in the West Fork area. In addition to creating emergency and fire response challenges, the lack of a dedicated fire station has created insurance challenges for homeowners in the West Fork. In an area surrounded by the National Forest land, it is critical to have fire insurance for your home and other structures on your property. With no fire station in a reasonable proximity to the area, it is near impossible for the homeowners to obtain fire insurance in the West Fork. The text of this amendment is identical to the West Fork Fire Station Act, which passed the House by a voice vote last month. I encourage my colleagues to once again support this measure as an amendment to H.R. 2. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back.
I yield back.
Is there any member that wishes to claim time in opposition to the amendment? The questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado, those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 20, printed in Part C of House Report 115-677. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
House Report number 115-677, offered by Mr. Thornberry of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 891, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Thornberry, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I would like to commend the chairman of the Ag Committee, Mr. Conaway, for his work not only in formulating this bill, but in promoting and protecting the interests of rural America. I think it is a great tribute to him, dealing with a number of complex issues, and I appreciate very much a job well done. Mr. Chairman, when we go to the grocery store, we make decisions about what type of beef and what grade of beef we are going to purchase. The challenge is that the grades are different from place to place because there is not a uniform grading system across the country. My amendment requires USDA to set up 3 training centers to train graders so that there can be more standardization. If you're going to buy a prime or a choice steak in one place, it should be roughly the same as a prime or choice steak in another place. This will benefit consumers, it will benefit the beef industry, and I hope our colleagues will support it. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. Is there any member that wishes to claim time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of the time.
The gentleman yields back. Question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee now rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration H.R. 2, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
Chair of the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2 and has come to no resolution thereon. Pursuant to House Resolution 900 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House in the Committee of the Whole House of the State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2. Will the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Weber, kindly resume the chair?
The House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 2, which the clerk will report the title.
A bill to provide for the reform and continuation of agriculture and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole House rose early today, Amendment Number 20, printed in Part C of House Report 115-891, offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Thornberry, had been disposed of. Pursuant to House Resolution 900, no further amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute referred to in House Resolution 891 shall be in order, except those printed in House Report 115-679. Each such further amendment shall be considered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 1, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Speaker.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 1, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Ms. Fox of North Carolina.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, and the member opposed, each will control 10 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I commend my colleague Mike Conaway and the other members of the Agriculture Committee for their work on the Farm Bill. I have every intention of voting for the bill and have stated that on many occasions. Having been working on a reauthorization of a major bill recently, I can certainly sympathize with the effort here and say that overall, this bill is an improvement on past farm bills because it responds to the desperate need of work requirements for able-bodied people. However, there's another piece of this bill that has been around for a long time, 85 years, that is not corrected, is decidedly bad policy, and is long overdue to be corrected, and our amendment does that. But this amendment is not new. In fact, this body has debated it in every farm bill for over a generation. The issue of which I speak is the issue with sugar and the need for reform of the way we treat sugar, which is different from all other commodity programs. It's the only program that provides both loan supports and supply management. Supply management is the ugly cousin of direct payments. It rewards inactivity. Americans are outraged when they hear tales of direct payments to farmers for not producing something. That same injustice, reward for inactivity, protection from competition, is what we find in the sugar program. Let's be crystal clear about what the sugar program does. It puts the government in charge of deciding how much sugar will be produced in this country, which inflates the cost, and it guarantees the processing industry a base profit by giving them subsidized loans. We stopped these practices years ago for other commodities, and only sugar is left with this sweet deal. When the government gets into picking winners and losers, American jobs are at risk. The International Trade Commission has stated that for every job the sugar program protects, we lose 3 manufacturing jobs. Congress should not be in the business of defending a program that is a bona fide job killer. This amendment has a broad coalition of support. Free market groups, economists, environmentalists, consumer groups, and manufacturers all support this amendment. Let me tell you about the other coalition. It's not very large. It's made up of 13 vertically integrated sugar processors. That's it. Our government is transferring wealth to these processors. It shifts cost onto our nation's manufacturers and consumers by almost $4 billion annually. We're going to hear about that the amendment subjects farmers to some new exposure to foreign imports. What they'll fail to tell you is that between our government suspension agreements, import quotas, and tariffs, our government already regulates every single ounce of foreign sugar coming into our market. Will our amendment weaken the ability of the USDA to regulate these imports? Not in the slightest. We simply give USDA more flexibility. We're going to hear arguments about candy bars, candy companies, and lots of other distractions, but it's all brought up to shift attention away from the very program we're here to debate, the sugar program. In reality, the sugar program hates sunshine. It hates getting the spotlight, but I'm glad we're debating it here today. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. Does any member wish to claim on time in opposition to the amendment? The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in extreme opposition to Ms. Fox's amendment. She singles out sugar, cuts its program back to where it was 33 years ago, denigrates the hardworking men and women, the farmers and farmers. Those processors she mentioned are co-op owned. They're owned by those hardworking farmers. There's no inactivity within the respect of the sugar industry, and she couldn't be more wrong or more disrespectful of them. Her amendment will not save the taxpayer one dime. 15 out of the last 16 years, the sugar program has worked. The reason we've not changed it over all those years is it does work. If we were to move it under Title I to treat it exactly the way the other commodities would treat it, it would cost billions of taxpayer dollars, and we don't want that, and the sugar industry is not asking for that. This amendment will not save the consumer one penny. Because these large sugar users, of whom I am a great customer, they buy the carload. When the price of sugar dropped to half of what it should have been in 2013 as a result of Mexico cheating on the trade deal, they did not share that profit with anybody. And quite frankly, just to put it succinctly, if sugar was such a driving cost and the cost of all production and cost all the jobs that the gentlelady mentioned, my diet soda would cost dramatically less than a sugar soda. Oh, they don't. They cost exactly the same. They still give this product away in restaurants. So as we go about this issue, this is about protecting American jobs, American hardworking farmers from unfair, undue competition from around the world. We don't let other products come into this country at below the cost of production. We do it when we fight steel. We do a recent fight against Turkey over the imports of steel because it was below the cost of production. We would protect all other products that way. We just simply leave this one in place because it works year in and year out, except for the 1 year that Mexico cheated. They've admitted they cheated on the program, and that's when it costs Americans taxpayers money. So it doesn't save taxpayer money. It doesn't save consumers money. It's simply a windfall of some amount to the sugar buyers and users. And I don't have a grudge against them at all. Like I said, I eat and drink their products. But I'm trying to defend American farmers from products being produced overseas by slave labor in some instances, child labor in other instances, standards of which we don't produce. It's dumped into these markets because those governments, unlike ours, have a direct payment to their farmers and producers to keep them in business. With that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserved. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Kind.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I rise in support of the amendment. I thank her leadership on this issue. This amendment is long overdue. The sugar program that currently exists has distorted the marketplace for too long. According to one estimate, it's driven up consumer prices by over $4 billion a year, and it's making it more difficult for us to negotiate greater market access and trade negotiations overseas. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm also disappointed that many of my fiscally responsible reform amendments were rejected late last night in the Agriculture Rules Committee, such as, why do multimillionaires and billionaires still qualify for agriculture subsidies under the current bill? Why do those earning over $500,000 in adjusted gross income get subsidies under this bill? Why are multiple people on the same farm receiving the same subsidies under this bill, from husbands to wives to sons to daughters to nephews to nieces to cousins? Why can't we at least track where the crop insurance premium subsidies are going, which is currently prohibited under this bill? You know, this legislation should be working for family farmers, not powerful special interests here in Washington. I fear it's a missed opportunity. This amendment at least introduces some modicum of reform, which is long overdue, in a program that has distorted the marketplace for too long, and I encourage my colleagues to accept it today. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentlelady from North Carolina reserve?
Yes, sir.
The gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize the ranking member of the powerful Agricultural Committee, Mr. Peterson, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized.
Ways and Means Committee would actually do something about the illegal subsidization that's going on in the sugar industry in the world, instead of come here and complain about a program that actually works. I have the biggest sugar district in the country. The people that grow sugar in my district are small farmers. They put their own money to build a plant. You know, they have the whole, it's probably 25% of the economy in the north part of my district. You know, and all this amendment would do is give this jobs and this market away to other countries that are subsidizing their people more than we are in the United States. And they're working these plants with child labor, slave labor in these other places. Is that what you want to do? Give away our jobs to people that are, you know, no environmental regulations? You go down to Brazil, they're making sugar out of sugar cane. They're burning the gas. It goes right into the atmosphere. There's no EPA. There's no regulations whatsoever. They're putting this vinasse, which is like oil, right into the river. You know, and we're going to get rid of an industry in the United States that's doing a good job. It's the lowest cost producer in the world, you know, and we're going to give it up because other people are cheating. Now, people say, well, this thing costs money. It only costs money 1 year. And the reason is because the Mexicans dumped into our market and our government didn't do anything about it. You know, and when we finally got the suspension agreement in place, then we were able to get this thing stabilized. So this is an amendment that is not needed. This is a program that works. And the reason we have this program is to protect ourselves from all these other countries that are subsidizing their industries more than we are in the United States. And we are the lowest cost producer in my district. We're the lowest cost producer of any place in the world. You know, and we could compete. But we can't compete against governments that are dumping money in and not following environmental regulations, not following child labor laws. We can't compete against that. So please, vote down this amendment. It's something that's not necessary and it's not needed.
When time has expired, the gentleman from Texas reserves, the gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Not my words, but the International Trade Commission says for every job sugar protects, we lose 3 manufacturing jobs. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Henserling.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I come here to the House floor as the son, grandson, and great-grandson of farmers. I grew up working on a farm in rural Texas, and I strongly oppose federal subsidies to agricultural in general and the sugar program in particular. Under the federal sugar program, which dates back to the New Deal, domestic sugar prices are propped up via a Byzantine system of marketing, allotments, import quotas, price supports, and a loan guarantee program so bad it would make a Soviet commissar blush. This may be a sweet deal for sugar producers, but it is not a sweet deal for the auto mechanic in Mesquite, Texas, the store clerk in Mineola, Texas, or the teacher in Garland, Texas that I represent in the 5th District. Where is their government subsidy program? This is anti-job, it is a food tax, it is income redistribution at its worst, and it is not commensurate with any free market principle. I know. I urge all members to support the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. I'm sorry, the gentleman, thank you, the gentlelady from North Carolina reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We would point out that over half of all U.S. sugar processing operations in the United States since 1980 have closed. And with that, I recognize the gentleman from Florida for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a farm policy. The farm policy is there to produce a policy so that the American farmers can go out and raise crops for the United States of America to continue to produce the highest quality, the most abundance, and the cheapest food produced in the world, of any industrialized world. That's why we have a farm policy. This amendment of Ms. Fox's goes after the American farmers for the betterment of multinational soda companies and candy companies. And the price of sugar won't go down. In my hometown, a 4-pound bag of sugar costs $2.64. And I would ask every member in Congress, how many members in your district have come up to you and pleaded about you to do something about the cost of sugar? This is about the American farmer, not about candy companies and soda companies. It's misdirected, and I oppose it, and I strongly advise everybody to vote against it.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas.
Yes, sir. And I would also point out, in addition to those closed plants and jobs lost in the sugar growing industry, U.S. and foreign sweetened product manufacturers have announced 100 plant openings, acquisitions, or expansion with the United States over that same time frame, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to my colleague from Virginia, Mr. Goodlatte.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to support fair sugar policy. The sugar program represents a hidden tax on American businesses and consumers and is responsible for the loss of U.S. food manufacturing jobs. Each month, families go to the grocery store, and unbeknownst to them, the sugar in many of the products they buy is subject to a cost that is generally 30 to 40% higher than the world cost. Very few, if any, will ever know that a hidden sugar tax has been imposed upon them by the sugar program. This hidden tax totals at least $2.4 billion a year for American consumers. There are more than 600,000 sugar-using industry jobs in our nation, including thousands in Virginia's 6th District. I want to stand up and be counted as an advocate for keeping those jobs in the United States, and I hope my colleagues will join me in voting for this amendment to help put an end to the hidden costs of the sugar program. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina
reserves.
Reserves. The gentleman from Texas recognized.
Now, inquire how much time is left on both sides.
The gentleman from Texas has 4.5 minutes.
And the other side?
The gentlelady from North Carolina has 3.5 minutes.
All right. Mr. Speaker, I would point out that hidden tax that my colleagues are talking about will not be shared with the consumers. It's never been shared when the price of sugar goes down. It'll simply shift those profits into the multinational corporations that we're defending by supporting this amendment. And with that, I yield 30 seconds to my colleague from Michigan.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you may guess, I'm a big fan of a good candy bar. In 1983, a candy bar cost 35 cents, and the cost of sugar is about 2 cents worth. 35 years later, I'm still a fan of candy bars. In 2018, that same candy bar costs $1.49. They're a little slimmer, and the cost of sugar is still 2 cents. United States retail sugar costs are the lowest in the world, 59 cents a pound compared to 71 cents on the open market. The sugar program costs the taxpayers zero. Cost us once in the last 16 years. Rather than message about alleged conservative amendments, let's focus on addressing meaningful changes.
Was expired.
I yield back. I oppose the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas continues to reserve. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 1 minute.
I appreciate the gentlelady's courtesy. The facts are that there are lots of companies that use sugar that aren't behemoths. I represent a number of them in Portland, Oregon, that are confectioners, candy makers, bakers who are concerned about this. In terms of the benefit, think about the 13 mega processors that are the sugar program forces manufacturers to pay far more than they need. This is a $3 billion burden on the taxpayer. We have an opportunity here to deal with one other area. If we start getting the pricing right, there's another hidden tax in terms of the sugar system that we have, and that's been on the Florida Everglades. We have a $7.5 billion down payment because of the damage that has been inflicted on the Everglades by the massive cane sugar operation that has increased dramatically in the last 50 years. A cost that taxpayers will be footing, an environmental cost to go with the burden on sugar-using industries.
Time has expired.
I strongly urge approval of the amendment.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina continues to reserve. The gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize Ms. Kildee for 30 seconds.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to point out that the Republican chairman of this committee and the Democratic ranking member of this committee both oppose this amendment for good reason. It's a simple question. Do we want to support local growers like the 900 families that I represent who collectively, through a co-op, own their processing facility? This notion of mega producers is really a story of 900 families that collectively bound together in a co-op to own the production facility to deal with the sugar that they themselves grow. This is a question of local growers or foreign subsidized sugar using child labor, and that's the simple question before us.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas continues reserved. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the gentlelady. I rise in support of this amendment, which will create some fairness for more than 600,000 workers across our country who are in small businesses, manufacturing facilities that use sugar as an ingredient in the products they make. Over 91,000 of those jobs and 2,300 of those businesses are in my home state of California. The amendment would make the sugar program fair for taxpayers, manufacturers, and American consumers. By removing the many unnecessary government interventions that have kept sugar prices excessively high, manufacturers will create jobs and American consumers will no longer be on the hook for $4 billion per year in hidden sugar costs.
Lady yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina continues to reserve. And the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The U.S. is the third largest importer of sugar in the world, and virtually all of that comes in duty-free. Recognize the gentleman from North Dakota for 30 seconds, Mr. Kramer.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Mr. Chairman. Not long ago, President Trump successfully negotiated an agreement with Mexico to stop them from dumping illegally subsidized sugar onto the U.S. market. This amendment would undo the president's good work by reopening the floodgates to other foreign countries to send us their subsidized sugar at below their costs of production, further depressing the prices that my farmers receive. Vote no on this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas continues to reserve.
Now recognize the gentleman, Garrett Graves from Louisiana for 25 seconds.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when other militaries challenge the United States military might, we invest more dollars, just like we did a few months ago in our military. When the Panama Canals widen and deepen, we invest more dollars in our ports so we remain competitive. And when other countries have lower tax rates, we lower ours to make sure that we remain competitive and we can defend our folks. Mr. Speaker, I represent thousands of farmers from Louisiana that depend upon this crop. If we pass this amendment, the precedent that it sets rolling into other types of crops will devastate American farmers. This amendment is a flawed amendment. It is going to undermine our agriculture industry across the United States. I urge opposition. Yield back.
Reserve. Gentleman from Texas reserves. Lady from North Carolina recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Sanford.
The gentleman is recognized.
This amendment is not only about being against a Soviet-style regime and the quotas and a variety of other things that come with it, but this amendment is only about common sense. The one thing we don't want to subsidize is the things that cause us problems. And we are now spending more than $250 billion in healthcare costs as type 2 diabetes have ballooned. To give you the exact number, it's $327 billion a year is spent on type 2 diabetes. So the idea of saying, let's subsidize our sugar so that we can then spend more on healthcare is something that to me defies common sense. With that, I'd yield back.
The gentlelady from North Carolina continues to reserve. And the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize Darren LaHood from Illinois for 20 seconds.
The gentleman...
Recognize Mr. Adrian Smith for 30 seconds.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment. It's interesting to listen to the various arguments here, but certainly there's unfair competition, if you will. It's hard to even call it competition overseas. But we have unfair trade practices, and sugar policy here helps us defend ourselves. These are manufacturing jobs in western Nebraska that utilize very responsibly our natural resources, and I think it's only reasonable to continue a policy that is not generally a cost to taxpayers. I urge opposition to this amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas continues reserved. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The current U.S. sugar program represents an anti-free market scheme that imposes a massive hidden tax on both American businesses and consumers for the benefit of a small, concentrated group of special interests. And people say, well, we've got the safest, cheapest food source in the world in the United States. Folks, it's cheap because you're paying for it with your taxes. These are Soviet-style policies imposing significant unnecessary costs on the domestic food manufacturing industry and this consumer. Policies have imposed a $2.4 to $4 billion worth of loss to consumers and sugar users across the nation. These industries provide jobs to more than 600,000 Americans, including 40,000 Pennsylvanians, and I urge passage.
Buyer, gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina continues to reserve. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. I ask the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, for 30 seconds.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in solidarity with the South Texas Sugar and in opposition to the Fox-Davis Amendment. In Deep South Texas, we're proud of our sugar corporation, our sugar mill, and the jobs they support. Our existing sugar policy levels the playing field for American producers in the ever-volatile world of the sugar market. It works. Sugar grows, and my district can attest to that. Better yet, it has come at no cost to taxpayers for 14 of the last 15 years. I ask everyone to vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas continues reserved. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, can I make a parliamentary inquiry?
State your inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Do I have the right to close, or does the gentleman from Texas have the right to close?
The gentleman from Texas has the right to close.
Then I would ask the gentleman if he's prepared. Okay, then I'll reserve, Mr. Speaker.
The gentlelady reserved. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, sir. I recognize Ms. McCollum for 30 seconds.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in opposition to the Fox Amendment. In my home state of Minnesota, sugar beets number one. That means this amendment will directly hurt my state's economy. Minnesota Sugar creates more than 28,000 jobs and has an annual income impact of more than $3 billion. This amendment will cost Minnesota and other sugar-producing states so much more. It will hurt farmers, small businesses, schools, hospitals, real lives of real people in rural communities that this bill is supposed to help. We should be supporting American farmers instead of sending their jobs to countries that heavily subsidize sugar production like Brazil and Mexico. I urge my colleagues to join me in opposing this harmful amendment, and I ask them to stand with farmers in Minnesota and all across the United States.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm prepared to close.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government's current sugar program is a job killer. It ensures profits for the connected few at the expense of the many. It operates at a substantial cost to taxpayers, consumers, and businesses. It's rooted in supply management economics that were drafted nearly 90 years ago. Every other commodity program was subjected to reforms during the last Farm Bill, except the sugar program. Economists, consumer groups, environmentalists, manufacturers, editorial boards, and groups on both the left and right of the ideological spectrum have all endorsed the idea of substantially reforming this program. It's time to end Congress's codification of a special interest giveaway. It's time to modernize the sugar program. I ask my colleagues to support our amendment and the Farm Bill, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't disagree with more. The The savings that are touted by the folks in favor of this amendment will not be shared with consumers. They'll be kept by these multinational corporations and, yes, the small sugar users across this country. So prices will not go down. There's no tax dollars involved, in spite of the rhetoric to the contrary, except for 1 year out of 16, because this program worked. This program was not changed in 2014 because it works. It doesn't cost the taxpayers money. Sugar prices are not distorted. And the manufacturers will not be able to point to one instance where they've lowered the cost of their product when sugar prices did in fact drop as a result of unfair, unlevel playing field, unfair competition around this world. If we could talk the rest of the world into going to a free market, to a level playing field, then I would agree completely with my colleagues who support this amendment. But we're not there, and we're not even headed there, and we need to defeat this amendment, protect those hardworking farmers out there across this country, say no to Fox. I yield back.
The question is offered on the amendment by the gentlelady from North Carolina. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
On that, I request a recorded vote.
The gentlelady requests the recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from North Carolina will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 2, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 2, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Mr. Conaway of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 2 includes a substantive enforceable supportive work requirement for work-capable individuals 18 to 59. Waivers and exemptions were tightened to ensure little abuse in a system currently rife with loopholes and gimmicks. We've also heard from our conservative stakeholders that workfare is an important tool for EP participants. Based on their feedback and explicit examples of where this has been implemented correctly, this amendment includes establishment of that. It's simply good policy to send unexpended funds back to the Treasury, and this amendment does that. My colleagues on the other side said we did not count veterans, specific workforce development programs as a part of H.R. 2. Well, in addition to the provisions of H.R. 2 that's permitted state-based veteran workforce programming to count toward the work requirement, this amendment expands to include programs for veterans run by the Department of Labor and the Department of Veteran Affairs. Mr. Chairman, that would have been a terrific amendment for my colleagues to have offered in committee or on this floor, and we would have accepted it. But they chose to stay on the sidelines. I have a great food bank in my district, West Texas Food Bank. Its chief executive relayed how important it was to provide a 1-year certification period for the Commodity Supplemental Food Program for seniors, a program currently serving seniors. This makes sense and allows seniors easier access to this important program. It's engagements like this that is what our process is all about, and we have amended this bill amended our bill through this manager's amendment to include those. Mr. Speaker, we also have changes in here that strengthen our framework for coordinating between USDA on FCA on important operations, broadband work that's going on across jurisdiction. We want those two agencies to work together to better utilize the funding to make sure that rural America gets that broadband support that we really need, and that's included in here as well. And it also allows that the communities will have a better opportunity to work themselves rather than fighting the current bureaucracy here in Washington, D.C. This amendment also includes a variety of technical amendments and corrections to the bill that you would normally have in a manager's amendment. And I ask my colleagues to support the manager's amendment. And with that, I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Does anyone seek time in opposition?
I do, Mr. Speaker. I rise to claim time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, first of all, I just want to say for the record that both Feeding America and Feeding Texas oppose this farm bill because they believe it will increase hunger in America. Mr. Speaker, I thought that this bill couldn't get any worse, but I was wrong. This amendment is a sure sign that this underlying farm bill is a complete mess. This manager's amendment is longer than most bills that we consider in this House. First, it puts a Band-Aid on the beating the majority took during the markup when they finally realized that disabled people would be hurt by their zeal to sever LIHEAP from SNAP. But to do that, to help disabled people, cost them money. So they had to find savings somewhere. And they landed on taking away more flexibility from states for waivers, the result of which is that 600,000 people, 600,000 more able-bodied adults without dependents will lose SNAP. But here's the best part of it. The $600,000 will be kicked off right away, at least a year before the mandatory work scheme, which is underfunded and is going to be a massive bureaucracy, is in effect. So in spite of the rhetoric to provide on-ramps, off-ramps, trampolines, or whatever to help people get good jobs, they do not deliver. Not for SNAP and not for farmers. As I've said over and over and over again, I mean, a farm bill should be a bipartisan product. It should be reflective of bipartisan concerns. It should help farmers, and it should help those struggling in need to put food on the table. This bill doesn't do enough to help farmers, and it certainly doesn't do anything to help people struggling with hunger. In fact, this bill makes hunger worse in America, and that is shameful. And with that, I reserve my time.
On reserve, gentleman from Texas is recognized.
How much time do I have, please?
3 minutes.
Glad to yield 2 minutes to my colleague from Arkansas, chairman of the subcommittee on subcommittee chairman, Mr. Crawford.
The gentleman from Arkansas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support H.R. 2 and the accompanying manager's amendment. Let me just say I appreciate the chairman's leadership on this effort, not only in the underlying bill, but the amendment to improve on it. And I thank him for including my food access liaison provision in the amendment. Just briefly, this amendment, or this individual will be tasked with coordinating USDA programs aimed at improving Americans' access to quality food and providing technical assistance to community leaders who are working to improve the lives of those living in food deserts. This is a small measure of progress that we can all be proud of and continue our work to ensure folks have access to healthy and nutritious foods. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that access to healthy and nutritious food relies on the food security system, the strong food security system provided by this farm bill. And I thank the chairman for his leadership in that regard. As we'll soon vote on amendments, I urge my colleagues to remember the importance of a strong food security system for all of our commodities, whether that be under the ARC program or the PLC program for crops such as rice, soybeans, and corn, or the current sugar program. If we pick apart our commodity programs one by one, we will create giant holes in our nation's food security system. This compromises our national security and hinders our ability to provide healthy, nutritious food, not just to rural communities that produce the food, but to urban areas and, in fact, the entire nation and beyond. So again, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the chairman for his diligence and his leadership on this issue, and not only in regard to the commodity title, but certainly the nutrition title, and to our vice chairman and chairman of the nutrition subcommittee, G.T. Thompson, for his diligence as well. And I appreciate all the work on the part of our ag committee. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Arkansas yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
The gentleman has 3¼ minutes.
I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Delaware, Ms. Blunt Rochester.
The gentlelady from Delaware is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the honor of not only sitting on the Agriculture Committee, but also of sitting on the Education and Workforce Committee. And so I know very well how important healthy, hunger-free children are to a good education system. On top of an already harmful policies, the Conaway Manager's Amendment compromises the current science-based nutrition standards in federal schools' meals programs. By politicizing and legislating nutrition standards, this amendment, if adopted, will further threaten the school meals programs which millions of children rely on. The USDA updated the current standards based on rigorous evidence-based processes, as required by the last bipartisan child nutrition reauthorization. These standards rely on expert, nonpartisan recommendations. Research shows that children are now eating 16% more vegetables and 23% more fruit at lunch. Further, according to a poll by the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, 90% of Americans support the national school nutrition standards, and 86% say the school nutrition standards should stay or be strengthened. There is simply no reason to depart from science-based and evidence-based standards. We should not compromise on what is best for our children. That is why the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, and others oppose rolling back the standards. I urge my colleagues to oppose these efforts that would further threaten the health of our nation's children and students. I urge my colleagues to vote no, and I yield back the balance.
The lady yields back. The gentleman from Massachusetts continues to reserve, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Can I inquire how many more speakers the gentleman from Texas might have?
The gentleman from Massachusetts inquires how many more speakers the gentleman from Texas has.
Say again. I'm sorry.
How many more speakers does the gentleman from Texas have?
No, I'm ready to close.
And Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have remaining?
1 3/4 minute. Okay. The gentleman from Massachusetts has.
All right, Mr. Speaker, let me just close by saying, this manager's amendment highlights how deeply flawed this bill is. And I regret very much that a flawed bill is being brought to the House floor because of a flawed process. I'm the ranking Democrat in the Nutrition Subcommittee. I didn't see the nutrition title until it was made public to the press. We had 23 hearings in the Agriculture Committee. This nutrition title does not reflect those hearings. We should have had a hearing on this nutrition title to understand the impacts that it will have on some of the most vulnerable people in this country. We live in the richest country in the history of the world. We have millions of people who are food insecure or hungry. We have an obligation here in this House of Representatives to make sure that we don't let them fall through the cracks. And yet we have this bill that will make hunger worse in America. This manager's amendment does nothing to fix it. In fact, in some cases, it makes it worse. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to reject it, but more importantly, reject this bill. Send it back to committee. Let's do it right. Let's have a bipartisan bill, one that we all can be proud of. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But, gentlelady just previously mentioned the increase in fruits and vegetables being eaten by children at school. I'd point out that our bill actually includes $1.2 billion in incentives to help moms and dads out there who are on SNAP to buy fruits and vegetables and dairy to get a bigger bang for their buck and thereby hopefully increasing those commodities. Mr. Chairman, we've got a good bill here, the base bill. This simply makes it better. And with that, I urge adoption of the amendment. Yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Question on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 3, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 3, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Mr. McClintock of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Farm subsidies, essentially taking money from taxpayers to inflate the price of their own groceries, was never a good idea. They are the poster children of corporate welfare, since the vast proportion of them go to large corporations, not to small family farms. And 60% of American farms get no subsidies at all, contradicting the claim that somehow American agriculture couldn't exist without them. We spend about $20 billion a year subsidizing about 40% of our farms. That's $160 a year out of the direct taxes of an average family in America. And that doesn't include the cost to consumers from higher prices. As we just heard, the sugar program alone cost taxpayers $3.7 billion a year in higher sugar prices. That adds about $30 more to their grocery bills. Subsidies hurt taxpayers, they hurt consumers, and they even hurt farmers in the long run. The decline in farm economy since the last farm bill ought to warn us we're doing something wrong. Prices are signals sent by consumers over what they want to buy and the amount that they're willing to pay. If left alone, they tell producers what consumers want more of and what they want less of. If consumers want less soybeans and sugar and more wheat and cabbage, prices for soybeans and sugar decline and prices for wheat and cabbage increase. Producers respond by planting less soybeans and sugarcane and more wheat and cabbage. Unless the government distorts those price signals through subsidies, producers end up planting more of what consumers don't want and less of what they do. Thus, producers are artificially induced to perform below their potential productivity. Many of the subsidies today are in the form of crop insurance. Farmers get heavily subsidized insurance to guarantee them profits for their products. And who pays those subsidies? Taxpayers. Well, what's insurance? It's the monetization of risk. It's the way markets can assign a dollar value to the risk that one undertakes in any human enterprise. The higher the risk, the more expensive the insurance. By subsidizing crop insurance, we once again corrupt the price signals that farmers need to make rational decisions. If crop insurance for soybeans is expensive, the market is warning farmers not to rely on soybeans. If taxpayers subsidize the cost of that insurance to lower its price, we're encouraged very risky behavior by masking the cost of that risk. Once again, that produces bad outcomes for taxpayers, for consumers, and ultimately the farmers themselves because they've been led toward higher risk by distorted price signals. Nor is subsidized insurance necessary for farm loans. Bankers loan to other non-subsidized parts of the farm economy without subsidized insurance. There are no good arguments for continuing these subsidies. Most farmers don't get them right now. Those who do tend to be major corporations and not family farmers. Now, my amendment preserves subsidies for the next 2 years and then gradually phases them out over the next 10 years, assuring that producers who've grown dependent on these subsidies have plenty of time to adjust their operations. But at the end of this 12-year process, we'll have a much more efficiently functioning agricultural market that is accurately responding to the needs of consumers rather than to the whims of government bureaucrats. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves the balance of time. Who claims time in opposition?
Mr. Chair, claim time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, with that, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for 1 minute. Mr. Peterson.
For yielding. And I oppose this amendment. I was here in 1996 when we tried something similar to this. It wasn't as extreme, but it was supposed to save us a little bit of money. Frank, you remember? And it ended up costing us 5 times more than what we saved because it didn't work. This is a fantasy that's out there for some people. People have no clue how much it costs to farm nowadays, what kind of risks you take in farming. And if you want to make sure that we have a few people farm this whole country, this is the way to do it. Because without crop insurance, without these other backstops, young people and ordinary people will not be able to farm. The people that will farm are people with deep pockets, and that is not what we want in this country. Oppose this amendment.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Crawford for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where do I begin? I guess it was JFK that said the farmer is the only businessman who, I think he said it this way, who buys retail, sells wholesale, and pays freight both ways. So we're comparing apples and oranges here with a business that's, say, I don't know, an accountant maybe. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, and a farmer. Farming is inherently risky. So that's not even debatable. The issue we have here, though, is it worth to us as a nation to make an investment in our national security? Our ability to feed ourselves is absolutely crucial to our national security, number one. Number two, we support our farmers at a fraction of what the rest of the world does, and so we get much better value, much better return on investment. And I think the disposable income of the average American is somewhere in the 12% range on what we spend on food. And if you think about that and compare it to, say, in Europe, where they're upwards of 20%, in Japan in the 25% range of their disposable income, we get a much better return, much better value to the taxpayer. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also now like to recognize our colleague from Delaware, Ms. Lisa Blunt-Rochester, for 30 seconds. All right, apparently not. Thank you. Recognize the former chairman of the committee, Frank Lucas, for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why do we invest in agriculture? Because the ability to eat, to feed ourselves, is one of the most fundamentally important things that go on in an economy. We make those investments so that we will always have a sufficient supply of the highest quality food and fiber at the most affordable prices. Empires, countries, republics, democracies have been destroyed throughout history when they lost their ability to feed themselves. I would tell you a strong farm bill, the investment we make, is one of the key foundations to protecting the Constitution, just like our responsibilities to have a standing army to defend the coast, to defend the airspace, to defend our folks. Maybe you don't want to make that investment. Maybe you're willing to take a chance. But when we don't have enough to eat, it will be too late to fix the problem. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd remind the ranking member that the reason the 1996 Freedom to Farm bill ended up costing us more is because we ended up adding a whole new series of subsidies to it. Experience is important to heed. New Zealand has 4 times more dependency on agriculture than the United States. They're 4 times more dependent. And it once maintained an extensive subsidy program just like ours. In 1984, New Zealand ended those subsidies. Well, what happened? Farm productivity rose, farm earnings rose, farm output all rose. What do New Zealand farmers who opposed the ending of subsidies say once those subsidies were removed and the economy responded? The Federated Farmers of New Zealand says that, quote, it thoroughly debunked the myth that the farming sector cannot prosper without government subsidies. Mr. Speaker, it is long past time to debunk that same myth in our own country, restore to consumers the power to command what producers grow, and restore to producers the accurate price signals they need to maximize their productivity in a free and undistorted market. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, we got a clear-cut choice. You either want American producers to produce American food, or you don't. And that's what this is simply about. When I think about the Farm Bill, you can love it or hate the safety net we have in place, but it works. As the chairman said, the lowest cost price food in the developed world. Here's why that's important. Half of America works paycheck to paycheck. Their food budget is where they flex. The rent doesn't change, house payment doesn't change, car payment doesn't change, but if something comes up in the middle of the month, it's coming out of that food budget. And I don't want to make that mom's job any tougher than it already is than by raising the cost of food arbitrarily, capriciously, by ignoring the vast amount of competition around this world that is fundamentally unfair. If we could go to that utopia that my colleague from California would like to get us to, fantastic. But we can't do that. They barely could do it in New Zealand, for goodness sakes. We could not do that against the rest of the world. I would argue that U.S. production is a bit more complicated than whatever New Zealand might or might not be doing. We got to compete in a global market against foreign treasuries that are spending stunningly more money than we are. China spent $100 billion on 3 products in 1 year to subsidize their products. Now, did that send the wrong signal to those folks? Yes, it did. But our wheat farmers and our rice farmers and our other producers have to compete against the price that are depressed like that. We can't go naked against the rest of the world. If the rest of the world would go to a level playing field, I've got not one farmer out there who would say, no, we want to keep it in place. They want to compete in the cash market. That's where they want to make their money. This amendment would strip them the ability to do that. We will go to foreign imported food, coming at us with standards that are not remotely close to ours, labor that's not closely protected the way ours is. Let's defeat this McClintock Amendment. Show the American farmer and rancher out there who works harder than anybody in this world, who thinks a 20-hour work week is something they do in their second or third job in order to keep the farm going. Let's show them that we support them. Let's show that we've got their back. A yes vote for McClintock says, never mind, we don't care about you. A no vote on McClintock says exactly the message we want to send. And I'm hopeful this is a stunningly large vote so that American producers out there, who are some of the hardest working, best people on the face of the earth, can understand that this Congress understands the unfair foreign competition in which they are competing with. Vote no on McClintock, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from California.
Ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 4, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Number 4, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Mr. LaHood of Illinois.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. LaHood, and member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, the amendment I have introduced would streamline a burdensome regulatory requirement currently in place for 2 USDA programs. The first is the Agricultural Risk Coverage, or ARC, and the Price Loss Coverage, or PLC. My amendment changes the sign-up process from an annual sign-up process to a one-and-done process for the duration of the 5-year Farm Bill. Our farmers work tirelessly to provide food for our families, our country, and to grow products that are shipped all over the world. From raising livestock to growing crops such as soybeans and corn, they contribute to the lifeblood of my state in Illinois and also our national economy. To fully support the agriculture community, we must maintain an efficient and effective program and programs that allow our farmers to be globally competitive. Given the tremendous impact of the agriculture industry on the U.S. economy, we must work to ensure that our farmers are able to operate without burdensome and time-consuming regulatory requirements. My district in central and west central Illinois is the 8th largest district in terms of corn and soybean production in the country. And I hear from my farmers across my district and from my own Agriculture Advisory Committee that the amount of time spent filling out paperwork for these programs, even when there is no change to their farming operation, takes up too much time, too much of their valuable time, which could be used on their farms. Under the current rules, to file an annual contract, farmers need to collect signatures from landlords or other individuals with an interest in the land. Many landlords reside out of state or out of the country, making this paperwork burdensome and very difficult in many cases. Under our amendment, farmers will be able and be eligible for a one-time sign-up for ARC and PLC for the duration of the 5-year Farm Bill, so long as there are no changes to the current farming operation. If a farmer does not make changes to their farming operation, they must reflect those changes in a new sign-up, as is the current process. This simple fix will help our farmers spend more time farming and less time filling out paperwork. I want to thank Chairman Conaway and his staff for working with me on this amendment, and I appreciate all his support for this common sense reform that is so important to our farmers, and I urge my colleagues to vote in support of the amendment. I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does any member claim time in opposition to the amendment? Gentleman from Minnesota.
Time in opposition to say that this is common sense, and I support this amendment. Yield back.
Question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. It is now in order to consider amendment number 5, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition?
I have an amendment to this.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 5, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Mr. Rogers of Alabama.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Rogers, the member opposed. Each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Though I plan to withdraw this amendment, I seek to enter into a colloquy with my good friend, Chairman Conaway, regarding the Conservation Reserve Program and to express concern with the number of acres authorized in the CRP program in H.R. 2. Chairman Conaway has been a strong chairman and a leader for America's farmers, and for that I would like to thank him. CRP is a well-intended program that has a place in protecting sensitive lands. However, the program should not be expanded beyond levels currently authorized in the Agriculture Act of 2014. The Agriculture Act of 2014 reduced the national CRP acreage cap from 32 million acres to 27.5 million acres in 2014 and 24 million acres in 2018. H.R. 2 would then increase this cap by 1 million acres each year to a maximum enrollment of 29 million acres by 2023. USDA's Farm Service Agency's CRP enrollment data reveals that for 2016 fiscal year, 23.9 million acres were enrolled in CRP, representing approximately 7% of the U.S. cropland. Rental rates and leases offered by the federal government are often much more lucrative than farming would be. While congressional directives and a favorable farm economy in prior years led to lower CRP enrollment, nearly 1/4 of all land enrolled in CRP has been enrolled in for more than 20 years, including 2.7 million acres, or 12%, enrolled for more than 3 decades since the inception of the program. During the 2016 fiscal year, payments for CRP lands totaled $1.7 billion. As our nation's farmers and ranchers face the challenge of meeting the increasing demand for food and fiber, in the U.S. and abroad, I would yield and ask the chairman, should America's producers be forced to continue competing with federal programs for access to farmland?
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for yielding, and I thank him for bringing up this important issue. I agree with the gentleman from Alabama that our farmers and ranchers should not be competing with the federal government for viable cropland. H.R. 2 made many changes to the CRP program, such as capping rental rates, payment at 80% of the county average, and stepping this percentage down for subsequent reenrollments of the same tract. I understand, however, the gentleman's concerns with the increase in enrolled acres, and commit to working with the gentleman and his staff on this issue during the coming conference report, should we get there.
I thank the chairman for his leadership and commitment. I withdraw this amendment.
Without objection, the
Yield
amendment
back.
is withdrawn. Who's this one for? To consider amendment number 6, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk
Clerk will
made in order
designate the
by the
amendment.
rule.
Amendment number 6, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Mr. Faso of New York.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Faso, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Mr. Chairman, I rise today to offer an amendment which would provide the USDA the tools it needs to quantifiably measure conservation outcomes. These provisions are substantively the same as a bipartisan bill I introduced earlier this year with Representative Marcia Fudge. If included in the Farm Bill, my amendment would have the USDA measure, evaluate, and report on various conservation programs across the nation. This information is necessary to help define, evaluate, and justify taxpayer return on conservation investment programs. Right now, the USDA can provide information on the impact of our conservation programs in the terms of contracts and acres, but they lack the ability to provide the actual impact of these programs on important resource concerns. By ensuring that the USDA has all the tools necessary to collect this information, we can better protect and preserve these programs into the future. The USDA's voluntary conservation programs are consistently helping farmers make investment in initiatives that protect natural resources while also increasing farm productivity. This amendment would ensure that the USDA can continue to improve existing conservation programs and practices while also supporting our nation's farmers. Mr. Chairman, we will also seek, in response to concerns that have been raised by the Farm Bureau, in conference to further refine the privacy provisions relating to the research activities that would take place under this bill to ensure that any personally identifiable information that would be contained within the analysis of conservation programs is further protected by the United States Department of Agriculture. Yes.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. Yeah, you have my commitment to work with the gentleman to address the Farm Bureau's concerns, to get them to a point they're okay with this, and I support the gentleman's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of the time. Who claims time in opposition to the amendment? Hearing none, gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'm encouraged by the support for my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. I haven't seen him on. It is now in order to consider amendment number 7, printed in House Report 115-679. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 8, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in House Report number 115-679, offered by Mr. McClintock of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment does two things. It increases from 20% to 70% the percentage of able-bodied adults in SNAP that would be required to comply with the work requirements in the bill, and it requires the use of the E-Verify system to assure that work training is available only to legal residents in this country who are legally entitled to work. H.R. 2 provides for a requirement that work-capable, non-employed adults look for work or train for work in order to receive SNAP benefits. That's important. When Maine implemented a work requirement for able-bodied welfare recipients, they found that 84% of this population left the welfare rolls and within a year had doubled their effective pay. Alabama saw the same results. Unfortunately, H.R. 2 would only engage about 20% of this population, 20%. This amendment would boost the work participation rate to 70% of able-bodied adults in the program. It does so by implementing changes recommended by the Heritage Foundation. H.R. 2's work requirement affects parents of children under age 6. This amendment reduces the exemption to those with children under age 3, but with an important difference. H.R. 2's requirements extend the work requirements to both spouses of children under the age of 6. This, in effect, is a marriage penalty that treats married couples as if they were single. The amendment I offer applies to only one spouse in the family, allowing the parents to share domestic and work responsibilities between themselves in any manner they feel is appropriate. This recognizes, encourages, and rewards marriage as the stable and nurturing environment that it is. H.R. 2 allows states to waive the work requirement in geographic areas defined by them with higher than normal unemployment rates above 6%. This amendment deletes the waiver for an important reason. Where there is high unemployment, there's also more reason to encourage job training and job searching in order to equip recipients to compete in tighter job markets. Sidelining these individuals is self-defeating both for them and for the local economies. Also, this amendment removes the ability of states to define these geographic areas in a manner that would defeat the work requirement in the first place. H.R. 2 also allows states to exempt 15% of the able-bodied population from this work requirement. This amendment takes it to 5%. Finally, this amendment requires that SNAP recipients be screened by the E-Verify system to assure that training is going only to those who are obeying our laws and legally in this country. This requirement is essential to the enforcement of our immigration laws, for otherwise we're spending taxpayer money to train illegal immigrants whom federal law prohibits from being employed. This amendment transforms the work requirement in H.R. 2 from an empty and symbolic gesture covering just 1/5 of the able-bodied population receiving food stamps to more than 70%. It rewards rather than penalizes married couples and recognizes that the shared responsibilities of marriage are one of the single greatest factors in reducing poverty. Children born into homes with single parents are 5 times more likely to live in poverty, and it's time our policies reflected the importance of marriage in protecting our children. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I claim time in opposition.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I rise in opposition to the amendment from my good friend and colleague from California. I do that respectfully. H.R. 2 includes substantive, enforceable, and supportive work requirements for work-capable adults 18 to 59. That is 20% of the population of 6 million individuals. Waivers and exemptions were modified, even tightened, to ensure that only the most vulnerable work-capable adults were waived from the requirement. Waivers take into consideration those areas with excessively high rates of unemployment, while exemptions assist those who need short-term reprieve because of temporary hardship. Allowing married couples to fulfill one requirement disengages recipients from the workforce. Work is more than just a paycheck. It provides dignity, social impact, opportunity, and creates the only path to self-sufficiency.
one spouse fulfilling a 20-hour per week requirement does not lead to self-sufficiency. It does the exact opposite. It creates a lifetime dependency trap. H.R. 2 provides equitable treatment to all households when promoting work, including those that house cohabitating adults or married adults. Currently, 42 states chose not to use education and training funds to invest in child care, which is an allowable investment. Reducing the age of the child from 6 to 3 is an undeniable barrier that disincentivizes employment more so than the current programming. Requiring education training providers to use E-Verify on all participants who depend on them for services is just plain cruel. SNAP has eligibility standards in place, and illegal immigrants are not eligible for benefits. This is simply a means to shut out the very organizations and entities that provide these necessary supports for individuals in need. And with that, I oppose this amendment and urge my colleagues to do the same, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from California.
I have one more speaker who will close out the debate on our side. Is the gentleman prepared to close?
Yes.
Okay, I'll reserve.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Please recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Fazo, for as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the gentleman from California's the impetus behind his amendment, but I think this amendment, if it were adopted, would threaten to destroy the carefully constructed efforts that we have endeavored to engage in the committee to create something that was realistic and achievable. Lowering the age from 6 to 3 will make it much more difficult for many SNAP families to comply with the work requirements, and reducing the ability of a state to have a waiver of up to 15% of the population will also make it extremely difficult by reducing that number down to 5%. So I think what the committee did was we have a finely balanced effort to try to move more able-bodied people into work and into training, and that while the gentleman's motivations are certainly fine in this regard, and he's attempting to get at the right thing, we think that the amendment, if it were adopted, would actually destroy the carefully constructed effort that we've made to try to encourage work and responsibility. I yield back my time.
Gentleman from Pennsylvania, yield back the balance of his time.
Reserve. Okay, I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Now I have one more speaker.
Okay, I have one more speaker who will close out our time, so I'll yield to the gentleman.
Okay. Please recognize
reserve my
the
time.
gentlelady from Delaware for as much time as she may consume.
Thank
He's
you.
recognized.
Mr. Chairman, 42, 23, 89, 203. These numbers stand out for me. 42 million people will be impacted by the SNAP changes. 23 hearings, 89 witnesses who didn't recommend the proposals that we're seeing today. $200 million spent on 10 pilot programs, which we won't get the results in time. And 3 years old, the age that we are reducing down from 6 for parents to go to work. These numbers just don't add up. And one of my concerns is that great proposals might be put on the floor right now, but we had a process, and the process has been flawed, and now we have a flawed product. So again, I urge my colleagues across the aisle to come back together in the great tradition of the Ag Committee and work on a bipartisan piece of legislation that moves Americans into work, meaningful work. And I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania has the right to close. Gentleman from California.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to my colleague on the House Budget Committee, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for minutes.
Okay, I'd like to thank again the gentleman from California for bringing forth this amendment, the gentleman from Texas for all the work he did on the bill. I think sometimes rather than have hearings, you find out a lot more about these federal programs, and particularly the SNAP program, if you talk to the local clerks at the convenience stores and the grocery stores and the income maintenance workers in the counties or the people who manage the low-income housing to find out what really is going on here. I'll bring to light one particular of the four provisions in the amendment, the idea that participants in training programs have to go through E-Verify. It's been said that you have to be a citizen to get SNAP anyway. I would suggest talking to some of the income maintenance workers or some of the people who talk to some of the people who use the SNAP program, and I think they will tell you that whatever the official federal law is, SNAP is routinely used by people who are not here legally. I think by requiring E-Verify for the training programs, we begin to go through the process of making sure that people who are in this country illegally are not taking advantage of taxpayer-funded programs. I really wish we had more information on this topic, but again, it is my belief that the average clerk in an average convenience store knows a lot more about the SNAP program than most PhDs in sociology. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, I just asked support in opposing this amendment from my friend and colleague from California, and to my friends across the aisle who keep asking for bipartisan opportunity. You blew the first one. That was in subcommittee where we could have amendments, and we're not seeing amendments for members here. So there has been plenty of opportunity for bipartisan work. I do appreciate the recommendations that my Democratic friends made in writing to both the ranking member and the chairman. All of those points and all the titles, I believe, or I know in the nutrition title, they were all incorporated into the base bill. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from
Then I'd
California.
ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California will be postponed. For what purpose? The gentleman from Texas seek recognition. The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Mr. Chairman.
Committee on the whole House on the State of the Union having had under consideration H.R. 2 directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
The chairman of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2 and has come to no resolution thereon.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that during further consideration of H.R. 2 and the Committee of the Whole, pursuant to House Resolution 900, Amendment Number 7, printed in the House Report 115-679, may be considered out of sequence.
Is there objection? And so ordered.
Thank you.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900 and Rule 18, the Chair declares the House and the Committee of the Whole House State of the Union for further consideration of H.R. 2. Will the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Simpson, kindly resume the chair?
House is in the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for the further consideration of H.R. 2, which the clerk will report by title.
A bill to provide for the reform and continuation of agricultural and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes.
When the Committee of the Whole rose earlier today, the request for a recorded vote on Amendment Number 8, printed in House Report 115-679, offered by the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, had been postponed. It is now in order to consider Amendment Number 7, printed in House Report 115-679. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment Number 7, printed in House Report Number 115-679, offered by Mr. Fortenberry of Nebraska.
Pursuant to House Resolution 900, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska and welcomes him to the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me thank my good friend, Chairman Conaway, for working with us on this very important amendment.